Welcome to the Capital Program Disbursement Request Overview. So thank you for joining us. Before we get started, as you know, Treasury has released 3 new FAQs last week. So if you haven't taken a look at those, please take a look at those. We're holding an all PJs call this Thursday, November 6th, 2025 at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. So please join us if you have any questions there. Okay, so I will be providing a brief overview of the disbursement request process and key areas to focus on the disbursement request form. Hope Jeffries will demonstrate how to complete the disbursement request template. Jay Flowers will take us through a demonstration of how to download and submit your template. And Karen Peabody will provide some best practices and details on supporting documentation. As was mentioned in the calendar invitation, the remaining portion of the presentation will be directed towards jurisdictions with BC Funds programs. Sue Chang will go over the BC Fund Disbursement Worksheet. So after this training, the BC Fund Worksheet, as well as the presentation deck here, will be sent out to participants. All right, so before we get started, also I want to highlight some of our resources that we have. We have the policy guidelines, reporting guidance, national compliance standards, etc. I think you guys are all probably familiar with these. And if you have any questions, you can always submit your questions to our inbox, which is ssbci_information@treasury.gov. Okay, so let's get into our disbursement status. So here we want to give you a snapshot of how many second and third tranche disbursements we've processed so far. In this first column, you can see that cumulatively, we have had 48 jurisdictions that have received their second tranche and 8 jurisdictions that have received their third tranche. So far this year, just in 2025, we processed 28 second tranche requests and 2 third tranche requests. That's just over $1.1 billion. So that's exciting. This is just to highlight also that jurisdictions are coming in for disbursements at a really higher rate this year, and we're getting through them as efficiently as possible. Okay, so some of the process updates that we've made is first, we've introduced data pre-validation, which if you're attending the office hours on a regular basis, you've probably heard a lot about this pre-validation. So for jurisdictions that are coming in at 50% EOT, you can get pre-validation. And this will be discussed again later in the presentation. We have our BC Fund Worksheet that we updated to assist jurisdictions with BC Fund programs. We have a supporting documentation reference file. So this file is going to help you collect, organize, and reference all your supporting documentation. This is going to help expedite the review process overall, and just also make sure that you are providing the documentation that we request and minimizing the back and forth. And lastly, we always offer one-on-one calls with jurisdiction. We're always available to jump on a call if you have any questions. We can clarify any questions you may have. That can be on a one-on-one call. We also, through the outreach team, have office hours that there's almost always a compliance presence there. So if you have any compliance questions, you're more than welcome to bring them up at the office hours as well. All right, so let's get into how to prepare for your disbursement. So first things first, we recommend that you download the template now. This is so that you can begin filling out the template as you continue to enroll transactions. So once you see the template later on in the presentation, if you're not familiar with it already, you're going to see that the cover page of that template is going to help you track your EOT, which is expended, obligated, and transferred. And it's going to also help you track your progress towards your SETI objective. Also, as you're filling in the transactions, you should be reviewing the transactions for compliance with SSBCI program rules. Review the supporting loan documentation, investor certifications, review for prohibited terms. Just make sure that all the documentation is complete and compliant. Also, a quick reminder on the template, if you have any modifications, please ensure you're using the latest disbursement request form. And if you're planning a modification, that might also affect your disbursement request form. So please reach out and just make sure that you're using the latest form that's available. And if you're in the process, just know that you might have to transfer that information to another template once your modification is complete. All right, so how does a jurisdiction know if they're eligible for their next tranche? So I think everyone knows the basics of receiving your next tranche, right? You have your main capital allocation, SETI, DSB, and in order to come in for your next tranche, you need to have EOT'd at least 80% of that first tranche to receive your second, and 100% of the first tranche and 80% of the second tranche to receive your third tranche. But additionally, per policy guidelines, you're also required to have 2 expended transactions in each active program that you will use to qualify for your 80%. So what exactly does that mean? Let's take this example. So jurisdiction Z has 3 approved programs, an LPP, a CSP, and a direct equity program. So if all 3 of the programs have obligated transactions, but only their LPP and their direct equity program have 2 expended transactions, okay? So if the transactions in jurisdiction Z's LPP and direct equity program amount to 80% EOT, the jurisdiction is eligible to come in for their next tranche. So the obligated transactions that are in the CSP, however, will not be counted towards their 80% EOT threshold because there are not 2 expended transactions in that program. Okay, so we just wanted to highlight that because there are some jurisdictions that are under the impression that you need to have 2 expended programs in all of you, 2 expended transactions in all of your programs, or that all of your programs have to be active in order to come in, and that's not the case. Okay, so let's go through the timeline of what it's going to look like when you come in for your disbursement request. So first, the jurisdictions are going to submit their completed disbursement request form in the portal. So once that disbursement request form has been submitted, an email with a DocuSign of the Annex A will go directly to the jurisdiction's authorized official. Once the Annex A is signed by the authorized official via DocuSign, SSBCI will be notified, and moving into that second box here, data validation will be performed on the disbursement request form. So this data validation is probably going to require some communication between the jurisdiction and compliance, and potentially even resubmission of the disbursement request form. Okay, so next, once the disbursement request form is squared away, compliance is going to select sample transactions and request supporting documentation for those transactions. So we'll review the supporting documentation and determine if those supporting documentation that you've provided matches what was reported on the disbursement request form. So in the next box, as part of our review, if there are any follow-up questions that we have based on the documentation you've provided, that'll be handled via email or via phone calls with the jurisdiction. So again, depending on the extent of the updates that are required, resubmission at this stage may also be warranted. Then once all the follow-up questions have been clarified or resolved, the disbursement request will move into final review and approval, and ultimately funding. So again, the overall theme here is that the disbursement request process involves regular communication between compliance and the jurisdiction. So just make sure that you have the appropriate staff available to address any follow-up questions and possibly provide additional documentation. Okay, so pre-validation, like I mentioned earlier, is offered for jurisdictions who are reaching 50% EOT. So as you know, to officially submit for disbursement, you need to be at 80% EOT. So this is a pre-validation because for jurisdictions at 50%, just for us to take a look at your disbursement request form and to identify any potential data inaccuracies or other matters prior to you actually submitting officially for your disbursement request form. So if you remember back on the timeline slide, the last slide, there is some time that resubmission may be required for your disbursement request form and some communication with the jurisdiction. So what we're hoping to achieve with this pre-validation is that we can minimize that time during the official review process if we have already seen your disbursement request form and provided any feedback and you've been able to make some changes to it before coming in. So pre-validation is going to be really important for jurisdictions, and it's going to help decrease the overall time for your disbursement. So how to receive pre-validation? So complete the template, that's one, and then submit the template via the SSBCI inbox, not the portal. So only submit in the portal if you are at 80% EOT and ready for your official disbursement. But if you are just doing pre-validation, you just send it via email. And also remember, if you are a jurisdiction with a VC funds program and you're intending to use transactions from that program to reach 80% EOT, you should also, along with the disbursement request form, please email in a completed VC fund worksheet as well. Okay, all right, eligible business purpose. So of course, transactions should be eligible for SSBCI per our guidance. So here on the slide, you have some of the eligible business purposes, and you also have some of the ineligible business purposes. So make sure you make yourselves familiar with these. So I also want to highlight that not just ensuring that the business purpose is eligible, but I'd like you to also ensure that there are no ineligible elements in your transaction. So ineligible elements would be goodwill, confessions of judgment. an interest rate above the NCUA rate, any prepayment fees, all of those are ineligible features of a transaction. So just make sure that that's not found in any of your documentation and your transactions. All right, expended versus obligated. So for transactions to be considered expended, SSBCI funds must be dispersed to a specific borrower or lender as part of a set-aside to cover a loan guarantee, collateral deposit, or purchase participation for a specific transaction that has closed. For VC equity transactions, SSBCI funds must be directly invested in a specific business. Okay, now moving into obligated. For transactions to be considered obligated, SSBCI funds must be committed, pledged, or promised in writing to a lender or borrower, and the loan has not contractually closed. For direct equity investments to be considered obligated, there should be a signed investment agreement, and the funds have not been received by the business. And for VC fund investments, funds must be committed, pledged, or promised in writing as part of a VC fund investment agreement, and the obligation is at the fund level. All right, so next column that you'll see on the disbursement request form on all of the tabs where you're inputting transaction is going to be the provider. So we want to make sure that you're inputting the correct provider. So let's go through the provider for the different programs. So for loan programs, the provider is the lender whose loan is supported by SSBCI funds. Specifically for companion loan transactions, the provider is the lender whose loan is the source of private capital at risk for the transaction. For fund investment programs, the provider is the fund that invests SSBCI funds and private capital in a business. And for direct investment programs, the provider is the implementing entity or contracted entity that invests SSBCI funds. I also want to highlight for direct investment programs that the implementing or contracted entity must be the entity that makes the equity investments for the approved program, and that is why they are the provider. Okay. Moving into total loan amount. Again, we're going to go per program. So for loan transactions, for loan participation program transactions, the amount, the loan transaction amount should be the private capital from the lender plus SSBCI funds. For CAP, loan guarantee, and collateral support transactions, the loan transaction amount should be the private capital from the lender supported by the CAP reserve account or SSBCI guarantee or collateral deposit. So for equity VC transactions for both direct and funds programs, the transaction amount should be the private capital investment plus SSBCI funds. Okay, and then also make note of the note at the bottom of this tab, which is the total loan or investment amount should not include borrower's equity, concurrent private financing, or additional government funds. Okay. On to SSBCI allocated funds. So SSBCI allocated funds, we're only capturing the amount of SSBCI funds in each transaction. So generally, this is pretty straightforward. The only one that I will highlight for you is for loan guarantee and collateral support program transactions. So that is going to be the dollar amount of SSBCI allocated funds set aside to cover the guaranteed amount of the commitment. So let's look at an example. So if a jurisdiction is guaranteeing a loan to provide collateral support for 50% of a loan, however, it only sets aside 10% of that 50%, then only the dollar amount of that 10% that was set aside should be reported under SSBCI allocated funds. And again, if you have any questions, you're always welcome to reach out here. Okay, moving into admin costs. So admin costs are a tab on the disbursement request form, very important. They're important specifically for you because they can help you reach your 80% EOT. So admin costs can help you reach 80% EOT, so they should be reported on the disbursement request form. So when reporting admin costs on this tab, remember that each expense does not have to be its own line item. Admin expenses can be reported in aggregate. So for example, you can report per expense type. For example, you could say salary, you can put legal, or you can report per month. You can group them maybe per month or other time period. But also just remember that you need to maintain documentation for these admin costs. So similar to the way that transactions on the other tabs can be selected for sample and we can request documentation to support those amounts, we can also request documentation to support admin expenses. Okay, just also as a quick reminder, administrative expenses paid for using program income should not be included on the disbursement request form. So that's because admin paid for using program income, it does not count towards your 80% EOT requirement for your subsequent tranche. Okay, moving into another tab on the disbursement request form, which is services to portfolio companies, our 171. So for jurisdictions that have VC fund programs, you will be familiar with this. So SSBCI funds may be used to pay for support up to an annual average of 171% of a venture capital fund up to a max of 10 years. And if jurisdictions use 171 fees to pay for these services, the venture capital fund must certify annually each year that the services were provided. So just be aware of that certification requirement and that this is available for programs with for VC fund programs utilizing this cost. All right, and now moving into my last slide, which is unenrollment. So as far as unenrollment as it relates to the disbursement request process, there are two areas in which it can come into play. So jurisdictions can identify non-compliant transactions during their own review, and compliance can also identify non-compliance during our review. So what will happen if that occurs is that the non-compliant transactions will be removed from the disbursement request form, and an additional sample will be requested. The good news here is that compliance can still process your disbursement request if non-compliance comes up. The only snag would be if that non-compliant transaction or transactions brings the jurisdiction below 80% EOT, the jurisdiction will have to provide additional transactions to maintain that 80% EOT. So again, just know that if non-compliance comes up, you can still participate in a disbursement request process and you can have an enrollment running in parallel. Okay, so that's all for me. I'm going to pass it over to Hope for a demonstration of the disbursement request template. Thank you.
Thank you, Marisa. We are going to go through a demonstration of the disbursement request template. This is an example template, and I will input data that's just made up. Remember, when you get your template, it will be customized for your specific participating jurisdictions program. The template includes several tabs: the cover page, a tools tip, tabs to enter your specific transaction information, and this will depend on your specific program type, administrative costs tab, and then 171 fees tab used to track fees paid to VC fund services. Let's start our walkthrough with the cover page. Remember, this tab cannot be edited. I'll walk you through an example of a disbursement request for a second tranche request. When you come in for your second tranche or your third tranche, we'll have pre-populated on this cover page the name of your jurisdiction, the date of your executed allocation agreement, as well as the amount of funding that has been dispersed to you. If you're coming in for your second tranche, you only see your first tranche dispersed funding. If you're coming in for your third tranche, you'll see the funds that were dispersed in your first and second tranche. This cumulative dispersed to date row over here is going to indicate how much funding you need to expend, obligate, or transfer to meet your 80% threshold. In this case, it's the $20 million. When I get to line 12, this line shows your total expended, obligated, and transferred across all your transactions. Remember, it doesn't include your admin costs that come in here in line 13, or your 171 fees that come in line 14. The total EOT line on line 15 shows the total which is your transactions, your admin costs, and your 171 fees. Line 17 and line 18 will show you your EOT percentage. So if you're coming in for second tranche review, you'll need to have expended at least 80%, like I said, of your first tranche, or 80% of your cumulative funds dispersed. If you're coming in for a third tranche, you'll need to have EOT 100% of your first tranche and 80% or more of your second tranche. As we enter some transaction information in the different tabs, you will see that this 0% line items will increase. Line 21 and line 22 will give you information regarding your SETI expenditure. Each jurisdiction has been assigned a SETI objective, which is your goal of what percentage of your expended transaction should have been invested in SETI-owned businesses. So that will be listed here on line 28, your SETI objective. The cover page will automatically calculate your cumulative expenditures as your SETI expenditures and show you what percentage you're expending on those SETI-owned businesses and how much of your SETI objective you're achieving. We recommend that you can reference the cover page often to help you track your SETI objective. And I highly recommend that you enter all your transactions information as you enroll them into your programs. So you can easily track whether or not you're reaching your required EOT thresholds over here, as well as your SETI objective over here. As I mentioned earlier, we'll come back to this tab once we enter transactions in the coming tabs. Moving on to the tools tip. For each of the data elements in the disbursement request form, there are tooltips available to help explain what we are looking for and what is being calculated. You can read these tooltips by hovering over the column header for each one, both on the cover page and the transaction tabs. If you're having any difficulty reading the notes that pop up, you can also read all the detail here in the tips tab. This tab shows you the data element name, which tab of the workbook that is in, and whether there's a drop-down list for your selected form, or if it's a free text, and a description that you'll see in the column header. So if I go to the cover page, if I hover over it, I can see the description of what's required for this specific column. So let's go ahead and complete an example of one loan credit transaction. And remember, the transaction tabs are broken up per program type, as I mentioned earlier. So for the loan credit transaction, there'll be loan guarantee, loan participation, and collateral support transaction. For the CAP transaction, will be the capital access program transactions and the VC. And then for the VC equity tab, it will be your VC fund and direct equity programs. This is just an example. So if you don't have a loan credit program, then you leave the total loan, you leave this loan credit tab entirely blank, and you can just skip over it. And same goes for other program types that your jurisdiction does not have. For the purpose of this presentation, we'll go over loan credit transaction tab. The first column that you see over here, you enter the information for an approved program name. And this is, again, it's a drop-down menu. And in this instance, I'm going to select a collateral program type. Again, as you can see, as soon as I input that, the program type automatically shows up here. And please remember, in column C, if you have a loan participation program, please make sure that you choose whether or not it's a purchase participation loan or companion loan. If you have a loan guarantee program, collateral support program, you leave this column C blank, which I am going to do right now. In column D, you enter your provider name. In this case, my provider is going to be Raisa, LLC. And then you come up on column E, which is your unique transaction ID. You decide what that looks like for your jurisdiction. There's not a prescribed formula for how you come up with a unique transaction ID. It can be alpha, it can be numeric, or a combination of both, but please ensure that this unique ID is unique for every single transaction. In my instance, I'm going to put 1234A. And then for your column F, F is expended, obligated, and transfers column, and I believe, and for our purposes, F and G columns go along together. In other words, Depending on the stage of your loan or investment, please indicate whether this transaction has been expanded, obligated, or transferred. And again, we're using the drop-down section here that's provided for you. In my case, it's going to be expanded. And then you want to make sure that in column G, you enter the date when that expanded, obligated, and transferred date. So in my case, I'm going to say May 2025 is when the transaction was expanded. And then in column H, you have to put in the business name. Again, we're asking you to put in the legal name, the legal business name. So no acronyms, no abbreviations, and the same thing goes for the provider name. So no acronyms, no abbreviation, it has to be the legal business name. So in my case, that will be ASMA LLC. That's the legal business name. And then when we get to this column over here, your EIN number, which is column I, this is a 9-digit number. If you're not going to be entering the ENI, please do not provide the business owner's social security number. If it's a business owner social security number, just put SSN. Or if you enter something, again, if you enter something other than the 9 digits, for instance, I'm going to start and say 1, 2, 3, 4, you get an error message. So you have to enter 9 digits. So in my case, I'm going to put 1, 2, 3, 4. And then for the business state in column J, this drop-down list of all state, it has a drop-down list of all the state codes. So please select one that is applicable for their business or for where the business is located. And again, we use this to determine, we use this to determine if this is an in or out of jurisdiction transaction. You're allowed to have up to 10% of your transactions outside of the jurisdiction, and we'll primarily use this business state to determine that. So in my case, I'm going to put in Virginia. So Virginia is my business state. And then for the zip code, it needs to be a 3-digit zip code. Sorry, a 5-digit zip code. 22302, it's a Virginia zip code. Also, so remember, your zip code is, we only need the 5-digit zip code here. We don't need the numbers that come after that. So ensure that the zip code that you're providing is in the reported state. We have seen instances where the zip code and the state do not match. So just be cognizant of that. In column M, again, this is the primary purpose of the loan, and this is a drop-down column, so you can select from the allowable responses here. From the majority of the responses that we have on this column here, you can pick anything that applies to the primary business. I do want to highlight, however, that if you enter other eligible business use, you can see that column N flashes in red. That means that you have to enter what that other eligible business is. So once you enter what that other eligible business is, as you can see, this line item changes. The red goes away. But for our purposes, I'm going to say acquire inventory. And once I say that, we can skip purpose of other eligible use, because again, you're free to leave this blank, and also for the secondary purpose, you can leave those blank. Let's move on to columns P and Q, which are very important two columns for your disbursement request form. This is the loan transaction amount and the SSBCI allocated funds. So enter the appropriate values in each of these columns. So in our case here, for the loan transaction amount, we'll enter 500,000. And then for the SSBCI allocated, I'll enter 140,000. Please note that in column R, if this is used to enter additional business funds that you have available for this transaction. So if you have any other state funds or any other funds that are government related funds that are using towards this transaction, this is where you would input them. For column S, this is the full-time equivalent employee. Again, You can hover over it and see how that is calculated. But I want you to remember on column S and column T, very small business go together hand in hand. In this case, for full-time employees, I'll put 7. And then for the very small business column, you have a drop-down menu, yes or no. And remember that anything less than 9 employees is considered a very small business. So in this case, I'll say, yes, it's a very small business. And then for column U, in this column U and column, I believe column U and column V, again, they go very well together because they're demographic questions. So you have to indicate whether or not it's a SETI-owned business. Again, this is just a yes or no column. In my case, I'm going to say yes. If it's a no, then you won't see this red pop up here. If you enter a yes, we do require you to indicate which category of the qualification that business used to indicate that they were SETI. This should be in alignment with the SETI certification collected from the borrower. If they say they're SETI due to business address being located in the CDFI investment area, then simply having this selection over here, status by business address located in CDPI investment, is good, and you do not need additional documentation for that. Similarly, once you select your SETI type, that red highlight will go away. So I just want to go back to what we talked about in the full-time equivalent a very small business. So let's say, for instance, as you know, you're allowed to give multiple loans to the same business as long as for different purposes, right? So let's say the same business came back and for a second loan, and this time around they had 15 employees. So we want to make sure that when you enter your full-time equivalent employees, you're not inputting 15 over here. Because what happens then, you're double counting the 7 over here. We just asked you to enter the incremental employee number. In this case, it will be 8. And remember, when you come here for the second loan, when it says, is it a very small business? The answer is no. Because now at this stage, this business has more than 9 employees. So they're no longer cumulatively as a very small business. So just keep that in mind as you enter these things. So this concludes my demonstration on the loan credit transaction. I just want you to know that everything that's going to be requested for the loan credit transaction is the same for VC equity and cap tab. I will quickly go through just a couple other unique items on the rest of the template. Otherwise, everything else is similar. So when you look at the VC equity transactions, so for this particular one, when you're reporting an obligation for an equity funds program, again, so in your expanded obligated, and this is you pick obligated and you've completed everything else that's required here. Remember that for this particular section, you only need to enter the EOT obligation amount, a unique transaction amount, the name of the fund, and the date those funds were obligated. The remaining information can be left blank besides the investment amounts. And Sue will walk you through in more detail later during the VC fund workbook through. For the cap transactions, I just want to highlight a couple unique items about the cap transaction. Again, remember for the cap transactions, column N and O. Let's say for instance, in this, I'm going to say 300,000 was the transaction amount, as an example. For this specific column, SSBCI allocated funds, this can only be between 2 and 7% of the total loan transaction amount. So if I try to enter anything that's higher than, let's say, that's outside those parameters, and I put in 30,000, I'll get an error. because again, this is above the 7%. If I try to enter anything below the 2%, I'll enter in 1,000, I'll get an error. So this has to be exactly between 2 to 7%. And in this case, I'll put 7,000 and I don't get an error. So when you get to this last two columns, total borrow premium and total lender premium, these two columns are specific to CAP transactions. So we do require you to enter amounts in here. So I'll enter $10 and I'll enter $490. Those are required for you to enter there. Moving on to the administrative costs. So when we get to the administrative cost tab, this tab is where you can enter your admin costs. And this cost can be used towards EOT threshold unless they've been paid for using your program income. So here you enter your transaction date. When was the transaction incurred? So I would say it was on May 25, 2025. What was the expense related to? And I'll just say salaries. Was the admin costs for VC fund expenses. So again, this is a drop-down menu. You have to let us know whether that was VC fund related, or yes or no. In my case, it wasn't. And then you have to let us know whether that was a direct or indirect cost. In my case, it's a direct cost. And then you have to let us know the transaction amount. And remember that we have said in the past that for this cost, because they get to be a lot of this cost, you can lump in your cost by for instance, your salary cost by grouping them into salaries. Let's say salaries per month or per week. But remember that when we do sample it, we will ask for supporting documentation. So make sure you're keeping those. Moving on to your VC fund costs, these are your 171 costs. So for the 171 cost tab, this will only be relevant for jurisdictions that actually have equity capital funds type program or hybrid program that's acting as a funds type. If not, you can leave it completely blank. Here, I'll just say you have to you have to pick your approved program name. You have to pick your provider. In my case, my provider is Raisa LLC. And then you have to give us the amount that you paid. I'll input 5,000 here. So now, as I promised, let's go back to the cover page. As you can see on the cover page, the items that were 0 before have been populated. You're at 0.97% EOT'd, and the zeros that we originally had have been automatically updated as we populated the transactions. As a reminder, when you come in for a third tranche request, the template will be pre-populated with all the transactions that were provided during the second tranche review. So all you have to do is scroll down to the next available line and start entering the remaining transactions for your program or that your program has supported. So this concludes my demo for the disbursement request template. Please feel free to jump in with any questions. Okay, thank you for your time, and I'll pass on to Karen for now. Thank you.
This can hear me. I'm going to go through some best practices. I think we're getting to the right page. Yeah, and Hope and Race have actually gone through a lot of these already. So I'm not going to. I'll mention a few of the key ones, such as the FTEs, disbursement threshold, out of jurisdiction. We do a test on that. You have a limit of 10%. Repeat borrower and business purpose we look at, admin as well. These are just some items to keep in mind as you're going through your disbursement, your DRF, when you submit it to us. I think if you go to the next slide, please. This is our disbursement information. And based on previous disbursement reviews, compliance has identified some insights and best practices to keep in mind for your disbursement request. SSBCI supported loan investment proceeds must be used for an eligible business purpose. And we encourage you to review lender documentation for prohibited terms and limits for all SSBCI transaction types. Certification should be signed at or before closing. And the complete language is important. We're seeing a little bit of divergence here. We recommend the language in the certs be as close as possible to the language provided on our website in our guidance. Sometimes we see missing certs and signatures when we're doing disbursement reviews, and that can slow down the process. So please keep that in mind. For both VSB and SETI allocations, funds dispersed to the jurisdiction for the purposes of investing in VSB or SETI-owned businesses must be expended towards those purposes. Like VSB, for example, and jurisdictions will have the opportunity to recover any withheld amounts in the third tranche if in the second tranche VSB funds were used in accordance with program rules. And lastly, jurisdictions must meet or exceed their SETI objective to qualify for their full SETI incentive funds. If we go to the next slide, that would be great. Disbursement information. Please note that SETI-owned certs are only required for categories 1 through 3. And the jurisdiction intends to include the transaction as expended for SETI expenses. Here are the different categories here. Category 1, for example, is for businesses owned by individuals who had access to credit on reasonable terms diminished compared with others. Category 2 would be a business owner whose residence is in a CDFI investment area. Category 3 is a business that will open, build, or operate in a CDFI investment area. And category 4 requires no SETI form to be signed. And that's where the business is actually located in a CDFI investment area. Also keep in mind, jurisdictions should ensure that a loan or investment is not enrolled in more than one approved program at the same time. A lender or investor may not divide one loan into multiple agreements or notes, each enrolled in an approved program for the same loan purpose. If we can go to the next slide, that'd be great. Some template reminders we have here. The transaction information like the disbursement request date, report on the DRF, and the most recent annual report should reconcile. We do look at that. This information should also be supported by documentation and consistently applied between transactions across the DRF. When submitting your DRF, remember that all transactions up to that time should be reported. When you certify in section 4 of the portal that Jay is going to demonstrate shortly, you are certifying that all your transactions are compliant with SSBCI program rules. And also on the DRF, we collect business state zip codes, and we test that to make sure jurisdictions are meeting their 10% allocation for out-of-jurisdiction transactions. Also, when reporting multiple transactions to the same borrower on the DRF, please be sure to remember that between the borrower investee's initial transaction and subsequent transactions, please only report the incremental change in FTEs since the previous transaction. Also, the business name, I think Raisa touched on this, should be legal name of the business and should be consistent across all transactions, and this applies to the provider name as well. Please use the legal name, no acronyms or abbreviations. If we go to the next slide. Yes, some loan credit reminders. Please ensure that upfront fees or charges paid by the small business, excluding fees to the program, do not exceed 3% for loans greater than $25,000 or $750 for loans under that amount. Next, for the loan amounts under $100,000, lenders may not include prepayment fees. For loans that are at or above $100,000, lenders may include prepayment fees. so long as those fees are reasonable, customary, and clearly disclosed to the borrower. I encourage you to look at our guidance for that. For refinancing transaction, the underlying purpose of the loan should be listed as the primary business purpose, and refinancing should be listed as the secondary purpose on the DRF. We've seen that a lot in our disbursement reviews, that issue. Lastly, SSBCI funds may not be used as credit support to a loan or investment for the same business purpose as an SBA or USDA guaranteed loan. So that's all I have on this slide in my notes. If you can go to the next one, please. This is for equity VC. The private investment should constitute private financing as defined in the capital program policy guidelines on one-to-one financing. Also, please keep in mind that for equity direct investment programs, if the equity investor is a fund or similar entity, the fund or entity manager must have exposure to the risk of its portfolio in a manner that is consistent with industry standards. Also, the agreement between the fund and the portfolio company should include the identification of the services to be provided to portfolio companies and disclosure of those services offered by the portfolio company's fund manager. PJ should be careful to ensure they maintain pro rata at all phases of investment and fund expenses for VC fund programs. And this one's a little complicated for the debt equity hybrid programs. I know Raisa touched on that earlier. Treasury evaluates those transactions under the Equity Venture Capital OCSP standards in the program policy guidelines, with the exception of the standard for lender or investor capital at risk, which will be the standard applicable to debt investors that originate loans. And then equity program COI standards apply to transactions in debt equity hybrid programs. So please keep that in mind. And as a reminder, a key characteristic of the debt equity hybrid programs is that the loan portion must also have equity-like characteristics as well. I think that's all I have on this slide. We could go to the next one, please. And that's the supporting documentation reference file. This file helps with collecting, organizing, and referencing supporting documents, and it's pretty new. We've only used it in the past year, I guess. Jurisdiction will receive the file from compliance when they receive the sample request email. And then the reference file attachment should be completed and submitted along with requested supporting documents. The file outlines a recommended process for labeling and numbering, as well as how documents should be uploaded. And the goal for this file is to make document collection process smoother for both compliance and jurisdictions. And we think it's been helping expedite on our end for sure. The next slide, please. That is the supporting documentation for loan credit. I'm not going to go through everything here. It's a good reference file for you guys, slide for you guys. But I would encourage that before submitting documentation for sample transactions, the jurisdiction should review the documentation to ensure everything's complete. The list we have on the slides are not comprehensive, but one item we look at is borrower application, which lists the borrower's name, address, etc. We also really focus on documentation such as the credit memo, the sources and uses, and the settlement, which could indicate if there's any public or borrower's equity, public financing or borrower's equity. Onto the next one, we have a similar one for VC equity transactions. Again, I'm not going to go through everything, but just keep in mind this is not a comprehensive list, but some really important items would be the investment agreement, which outlines the terms and conditions of an investment. Cap table, which shows who owns the company before, during, and after the investment. Insider list we also look at, and that's provided. We want it to be ensured that it's provided to investors and investees of SSBCI funds. Also, the term sheet summarizes the total amount and form of the investment and verifies that equity investments have private capital that is at least pari passu or junior to SSBCI cash flow rights. That's very important for us. And then we look at capital calls, which is a transfer of promised funds to the investment, and it notes the amounts dispersed. And we look at the date of disbursement too. If we can go to the next slide, it's a briefer one on CAP transactions. A few of you guys have CAP programs that they're not as popular. But this for the side, similar to loan and credit transactions, we'll be looking for the borrower application, and then we also look at the documentation like the credit memo, sources and uses, to indicate the private financing on that. We can go to the next slide. This is kind of that big one, the EPCOC. Here we have the supporting documentation for the EPCOC transactions. One of the first items we look at is the lease agreement between the EPC and the OC, and it should be equal to the term of the SSBCI supported transaction. Also keep in mind, this is something that's really important, that is that 100% of the rentable property acquired and held using SSBCI funds to the EPC must be leased to one or more OCs. The OC may subsequently sublease no more than 49% of the total rentable square footage in the case of an existing building, or no more than 40%, and that's in the case of new construction. We also look for evidence such as the borrower's application that references co-borrowers, and if there's a guarantee agreement that will identify the guarantor. One other item is we look for the certs, and all the certifications should include the SSBCI language per our SSBCI national compliance standards, and should be executed on or before the loan or investment. That's kind of all I have on the EPCOC. If we could go to the next slide. Yes, some sample best practices. We recommend a secure file transfer method to send supporting documents to SSBCI. Please note that SSBCI staff only need temporary access during the disbursement process, and access should be removed once the disbursement request has been completed. And please do not password protect individual documents, and please ensure the documents are legible. We have had some instances where we couldn't read them. Also, if you have any items with redacted content, we will request access to the redacted information if needed. Also, jurisdictions may consider incorporating a naming convention and providing index that'll help point to where items are in the documentation. We love seeing page numbers where requested information can be found. That's really helpful to us. And if we go to the next slide, we are at the finish line. And to round out the presentation before we jump into the BC worksheet that Sue's going to go over later. And then once the full timeline that Raisa has shared earlier is completed, compliance will reach out to jurisdictions with a final closeout email for our disbursements. And there are some additional, at that point, additional reviews are completed within Treasury. Once that is complete, the process moves from compliance to our operations team for funding of the disbursements. And for jurisdictions that have already completed their second tranche request, any communications regarding previously reviewed transactions that we might have done in the second tranche should be taken into account for transactions going forward. We're hoping, the third will be a lot more efficient than the second. And that's all I have here in my notes, guys. And then I'm passing it on to Jay, who's going to do a demo of our portal. So thanks, Jay. Go for it.
Thank you, Karen.
Yep. Thank you, Karen. So I'll go ahead and jump into the demo portion of today's meeting. And Karen, can you verify that you are seeing the portal on the screen now?
Yes.
Perfect. So I'm going to put a few links inside the chat, and we're going to run through these as we go through the demo. And again, this is going to be a pretty quick demo today. But don't worry, we do have that SSBCI _ information at Treasury Gov inbox that you have any issues while submitting your disbursement request. You can send that information over to us and we'll be able to help you out. Also, we have a resources tab down on the bottom. So once you're logged into the portal, when you scroll down to the bottom of the resources tab, you're going to be defaulted to the capital program. And if you scroll all the way down, then you're going to have the disbursement request area where we do have a video. And this video does have information that walks through viewers through how to download, upload, certify, and submit the disbursement request from within inside the portal. So that takes care of that first link, the SSBCI _ information. The second link is going to be this page here, and this is SSBCI's portion of the CARES Act portal. And you can notice that it has a SSBCI homepage at the tail end of the URL. And this is for people that or jurisdictions that only deal with the SSBCI program, part of the CARES Act. That second link that you see in that tab is going to be if you have other programs that you interact with, and you'll see up in the URL the SSBCI-home page has disappeared. You can click onto this link to still have access to your other programs within the CARES Act. So we're going to go ahead and click on the SSBCI program, and we're going to start our demo for today. So like most things inside of the portal, everything is still set up the same, where you come on the left-hand side and you click on the capital program disbursement request, and then you find your second tranche record if it is for your second tranche. And you would click the blue pencil icon, and this would jump you inside of the disbursement request area. This first page is just going to be for your user instructions. And just like everything else in the portal, we have the left-hand navigation. Down towards the bottom, we have additional navigation buttons that allow you to get to the next and back to your previous page. On the right-hand side, you're going to have a widget that stays sticky throughout the pages that or sections that you're clicking through. So this will always be the same over here. This essentially just tells you what the status is and what your jurisdiction is. So again, this first page is going to be your user instructions. We have a little bit of information that we've provided in here where we have the capital program disbursement request form user guide and just the other information here. Just advise you to read everything in here just to make sure that you're comfortable with inside of the portal. Your second page is going to be your participating jurisdiction information. And essentially, this is going to be your implementing entity information here. This is my demo area or our sandbox, so this information is not going to be 100% incorrect. So we just encourage you guys to come in here and make sure everything is correct here. And if you have any issues with implementing entity information, we ask you to reach out to us at the SSBCI _ information at treasury.gov. So we're on this second page, and the second area that we have down here is going to be your current contacts within inside of your jurisdiction account. We have this here just to list out everybody that has their roles, their email address, title, and name. And we've also given you the ability by clicking this word page to jump to our COVID-19 Relief Hub. And inside this COVID-19 Relief Hub, you do have the ability to adjust your contacts for your jurisdiction. If it's the first time logging into this area, you will only see introduction and certification. You just have to put your name inside of here and click submit. And this is basically just saying you have the ability or the authority to add individuals to your jurisdiction's account. Once you do click submit here, then this designation form line will pop in, and just simply click in that. And then you come into the area where you're going to see a table down towards the bottom that has all of your jurisdictional contacts. Two options here. You can add a new contact here by clicking add new contact. And you also have the ability to edit contacts here. So we're going to go ahead and click add new contact. And here you just need to enter all of the information that has the red asterisk. So first name, last name, title, email address. This email address is very important because it's the area where we have a connection with ID.me, and that is required in order to enter the portal. So we ask that if someone has a previous ID.me email address, add that email address here. Otherwise, if it's their first time logging in, then they have the ability to choose their work email address or their personal email address that they're going to register with ID.me. This person's information should be here first before they attempt to log into the portal if they're an existing ID.me user, just to make sure that person is associated with your jurisdiction account in this form before they try to log in using ID.me. No worries, if you reverse that and they try to log in, it will create a record inside of our system. And just let us know that, hey, this person tried to log in. We believe they have an additional or existing ID.me email address. Email that over to us at the SSBCI_information, and we'll be able to make that relationship with inside of our database. So we're going to act that this person is the first time logging in. So you just add the email address here, and then you have the ability to select the appropriate roles for that individual. We also have a communication role pick list over here. And this is just telling us that these are the types of communication this person is going to want to have. So essentially, if you're going to choose capital over here, you're going to use capital reporting over here if that person is to receive any type of capital reporting information from us. So I know this was pretty quickly done. So if you have any issues with adding or you want us to help you out with adding, again, just reach out to us at the SSBCI_information at treasury.gov, and we'll be able to help you out. So we're going to close this tab and jump back to the capital disbursement request form. So we've talked about this tab. We're going to move over to the third tab, and this is the Excel upload area. So it just gives you some information about what we're expecting. And this is information that both Raisa and Hope talked about, and Karen as well, earlier in their presentations. And we have the area right here with the word here where you're able to download your disbursement request form. And this is the form that you need to fill out everything, save it onto your computer. And then we have the upload files area where you click upload files, you search within inside your computer where you have saved that worksheet. And then once you have that, just double click on that. And that's going to upload it to this area after this word done turns blue. Once you click that, then you'll see that file enter into the table down below, and you will see the uploader turn gray. If you made a mistake with an uploaded file, you can always click that box next to the file name and click delete files. We're not going to do that, so we're going to move all the way over to section 4, where is the certification and submission page. Here is where, once you have everything uploaded, just make sure that this is the authorized user's email address, because once you click submit, certify and submit, the DocuSign email is going to go to this authorized official's email address. The fourth piece that I dropped into the text, I dropped in the DocuSign cadence. Prior to maybe 3 months ago, DocuSign was sent immediately to that authorized official. But we had to change over to a cadence where DocuSigns are sent at 8 a.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Eastern, and then 8 p.m. Eastern. So it's on a 4-hour cadence throughout the day, and it's going to be Monday through Friday, and it picks back up on Monday morning at 8 a.m. So if you're not seeing it, don't worry. It's going to come at either 8, 12, 4, or 8, depending on when you click submit inside the portal. Once you're ready to click submit, we suggest that you copy the name from the left-hand side, and we copy and paste into the box over here, because this box is both case and space sensitive. So if I change that to a lowercase s and I click certify and submit, I'm going to get an error message up top. So again, this is case and space sensitive. Copy your name here, paste it in here, and then click certify and submit. And then you'll see that everything is switched over with some green notifications up top. And you see that the e-signature pending status is changed over there. And this is just saying that the authorized official will receive that DocuSign at that cadence, 8 a.m., 12 p.m., 4 p.m., or 8 p.m. Once they receive that and sign everything through DocuSign, then this will flip over to completed. And that ends my portion of today's demo. And I'm going to turn it back over to Mayma.
Thank you, Jay. Appreciate your time. Before we move over to Sue, I just want to see if anybody has questions. We try our best to answer some of the questions that were in the chat, but if you have specific questions, please come off mute. We can also take your questions via the mailbox. But I'll say keep the floor open for like 30 seconds to give Sue some time since we're moving fast.
Will there be time for questions at the very end, just to make sure in case some of the questions are answered in the further presentation, or is this the end of the presentation?
Sure, we will do our best to answer questions so we can reserve time at the end. But if you have anything now, we will have our SMEs also on the call. So please jump in or put it in the chat directly to them.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, I got a question in the chat. Is there a provider column C, the SSBCI provider, or is there a private capital match provider? Can you come off mute to make sure I understand your question, please?
Yes, this is Shay Stanfield. What I'm trying to be clear of is in the provider column on that tab, are we listing the SSBCI funds provider, or are we listing the private capital match provider? So we're listing another financial institution.
Yeah, it depends on your program type. So if it's a VC fund program, you will be listing the fund as the provider. If it's a loan participation program, and if it's a collateral support or participation program, you will be listing the lender, the financial institution supporting SSBCI. And of course, if it's direct investment, it's based on either the implementing entity or the contractor entity. And some Raisa and team jump in here if I misspeak.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn over to Sue in the interest of time again. She's going to go through the VC Fund Worksheet. If you do not have a VC Fund Worksheet, please feel free to drop. If you have any questions, you can send that through the mailbox as well. But I just want to make sure that we reserve some time to go through that process. So please jump in.
Sure. Okay. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to start to the screen share. Let me know you guys can see my screen. Emma, can you confirm?
We see it.
Yep, okay. We can see your screen. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for staying on. I might run over a little past 4:30, so you guys can stay on to ask your questions if you like. Okay, so I'm going to provide a quick demonstration of the VC Fund Worksheet. And again, if time permits, we'll take any questions. The VC Fund Worksheet is optional supplement to the disbursement request form, but we encourage all jurisdictions with VC fund programs to use the worksheet and submit the worksheet along with your disbursement request form if you're including the VC fund programs to reach your 80% EOT requirement. The VC fund worksheet is designed to help you track your fund's obligation at the fund level, as well as expenditures at the portfolio company level. It will also help you track the admin costs for the fund, as well as 171 services fees. Okay, so the data that you input in this worksheet should then flow to your DOF, disbursement request form. Completing the worksheet accurately will assist us in expediting your disbursement review process. I also want to say up top that each sheet can be used just for one fund. So if you have multiple funds that you're investing in, you just want to make a copy of this sheet and fill out each one of those funds on a separate sheet. Okay, so let's get started. So when you open the worksheet, you'll see the first tab, which is the instructions tab on how to complete the worksheet. The second tab is the actual worksheet that you'll complete. I'm going to walk you through an example on this tab. The worksheet is laid out into 4 sections. Section 1, it will input the information on the fund, including the total fund commitment amount, SSBCI allocated amount, and it will generate the SSBCI participation percentage in the fund. In Section 2, you will show information on the investments by the fund to the portfolio companies. Section 3, it will show information on VC admin expenses paid by the fund. And then Section 4 will show information on 171 fees paid by the fund. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the top and start completing the sections. Okay, so Starting with cell D3, you enter the venture capital fund name. Here we have HM Venture Fund. This fund is in its first close, has no investment restriction, and it's the only jurisdiction that's participating in the fund. The next row is the total fund size. The total fund size includes SSBCI and all capital commitments, including any additional government funds and any private capital available to support non-SSBCI investment raised in the current and previous closes. The amount in this cell should agree to column F on the VC fund notification form that you submit to us. Here, for this example, the total fund size is 25 million. Okay. Next, for PJ executed commitment amount, this would be the amount of SSBCI funds considered committed by the jurisdiction to the venture capital fund for which at least 101 private financing available for the jurisdiction's SSBCI eligible investments that have been identified at the fund level. Do not include any amount of additional SSBCI funds that have been approved contingently on the fund manager raising additional private capital in the future. For this example, the PJ executed commitment amount is 5 million. The next few cells, D7 to D13, what you want to do is back out any non-eligible investments or other state investment amount or the private matching funds. For this example, there are no non-eligible investments or restrictions. If your jurisdiction has investments restrictions, ineligible investments, or investing in a fund with another jurisdiction, we've included these examples in other tabs below here. I won't go through these examples, but please reach out to us if you need assistance on completing the worksheet for these scenarios. Okay, moving down to SSBCI allocated amount, right? So SSBCI allocated amount committed to, this is the amount committed to the venture capital fund. This does not include any non-allocated funds that were part of your jurisdiction's overall commitment. An example of non-allocated funds include things like program income that was used to pay VC admin expenses. If you have non-allocated funds, you just adjust the number in cell C12 from your total commitment amount to get to your SSBCI allocated amount. Just remember, if you have non-allocated funds, there should be corresponding private match amount. In our case, we didn't have any non-allocated funds, so SSBCI allocated amount of 5 million is the same as the PJ executed amount in cell C5. Okay, moving to the next line, available private capital. This is a calculus cell. Since the total fund size is 25 million and SSBCI allocated amount is 5, and there are no non-eligible investments or investment restriction, the available private capital for this fund is 20 million. Next is target fund size. The target fund size for HM Venture is 25 million. This would be the sum of available private capital, 20 million, plus SSBCI allocated amount of 5 million. The target fund size should agree to column E on your VC fund notification form that you submit to us. Okay. The next row is SSBCI allocated percentage of private investment. This is also a calculus cell. It's simply SSBCI allocated amount divided by the target fund size. In this example, the percentage comes to 20%. Since SSBCI VC fund program operates as a pool investment model, this percentage, 20%, should guide how much of the fund's investment go toward portfolio companies, as well as how much should be applied to your VC fund admin expenses and 171 fees. In other words, everything, the investment expenses and fees should follow that same ratio as the concept of SSBCI VC fund programs is for SSBCI to support pool and capital fund. Okay, so now we complete this section. I'm going to move to section 2. This is where you will enter the expanded transaction for each company. Once you fill out this section, the information will automatically flow to the right side of the worksheet. This part of the worksheet should look pretty familiar because it's set up in the same format as the disbursement request form. What you see on the right side of the worksheet shows how those transactions should be reported on the DRF. Okay, I'm going to move back to the left side. I'm going to start entering investment information by HM Venture Fund into 2 portfolio companies. All right, so starting with the investment transaction date, small 1/2025, for company 1. The next is VC fund investment amount. The VC fund investment amount should be the amount invested out of the target fund size. For company 1, the VC investment amount is 100,000. Okay, which 20,000 is SSBCI allocated amount. The SSBCI allocated amount is the amount that's included in the VC investment amount. Okay, so I'm going to put 20,000 here. Okay. The next column is other private capital funds. Other private capital funds refers to other investors in the round investing alongside the VC investment fund. Company 1, the other private capital was 200,000. Okay. Next is the total investment transaction. Right. The total investment for this company is the sum of the VC fund investment plus other private capital. So the total investment in company 1 is $300,000. All right, finally, we're going to look at the last column, which calculates the SSBCI percentage of the VC fund investment. The pro rata calculated in this column should match the pro rata we calculated earlier at the fund level in section 1. So this 20% should align with the 20% calculated in section 1. Okay, any difference between those 2 percentages, you'll need to provide an explanation. As you can see, both of these are 20%, so we're good there. Okay, the second company it was invested on June, on 2025, and VC fund investment was 200, of which 40,000 was SSBCI allocated. And for this investment in company 2, the private investment, other private capital in the round was $1.2 million, which gives us a total investment transaction of 1.4. As you can see, SSBCI VC fund investment is 20%, which is the same percentage as the percentage at the fund level. Okay, I'm going to move to the right side of the screen, this worksheet, to show you how company 1 and company 2 expanded transactions should be reported on the DRF. For company 1, you can see that it's reported as expanded with EOT date of 1/1/2025, and the investment transaction amount is 300,000, which is coming from the total investment transaction amount from the left side of the worksheet. This number here, okay, F25. Likewise, SSBCI allocated amount of 20,000 here is coming from cell D25. Okay, same thing with this company 2, expanded transaction, EOT 61, and then investment transaction of 1.4 million coming from cell F26, and likewise SSBCI allocated funds of 40 is coming from this column here. Okay, so now we've completed all our transactions in this section. I'm going to move down to section 3. In this section, you'll enter the VC fund admin expenses that were paid by the fund. Please keep in mind that any expenses that were paid using program income or by your jurisdiction should not be included here. So very similar to the investment transaction section 2, you'll enter the investment transaction date of the admin expenses. Indicates the direct or indirect admin costs. And then for this particular fund, the expanded amount paid by the fund was 50,000. So enter that here. Just note that the VC fund admin expense is the amount expended from the target fund. The next column is SSBCI allocated amount, and this is the amount and that's included in the VC fund admin expense. So for this fund, the SSBCI portion is 10,000. Again, as you can see, the pro rata percentage is consistent with the to the fund percentage in section 1. Okay, that's only direct expenses they have, and I'm done with this section. But before I move on to the next section, you can see that on the right side, this is how you should report the admin expenses on the DRF. Okay, I'm going to move now down to section 4, fund services to portfolio companies. Here you will want to enter the VC fund management fees. The VC fund management fees is the amount paid by the target fund. For this fund, the VC management fee is 500,000, of which SSBCI is 100,000. So again, same percentage should be consistent to the fund at the fund level. And then again, this is how you should report it on the disbursement request form to the right. Okay, so I've completed all 4 sections. I'm going to move to the summary section. The summary section summarizes the fund information and the expanded transaction entered above, but it also calculates the remaining obligation that need to be reported at the fund level on your disbursement request form. So looking at row 70, we started with target fund size of 25 million and SSBCI allocated amount of 5 million. From there, we subtracted the expanded investment transaction from section 2, the admin expenses from section 3, and 171 fees from section 4. This brings us to the remaining unexpended amount, which I highlight here in orange on row 75. The remaining unexpended VC commitment and the unexpended SSBCI allocated amount are what you'll report as obligated at the fund level on the DRF. So here's how the remaining expended will flow to DRF on the right side of the worksheet. So for example, for C, 75, 24,150,000, which is the remaining unexpanded VC fund balance, will flow to the DRF as 24,150,000 under obligated. So at the fund level is 24,150,000. Likewise, on the SSBCI allocated amount, 4.8 million, this is coming from the 4.8 million that's shown as remaining unexpanded amount. Right? As you can see from this demonstration, I started with the expanded transaction, section 2, 3, and 4. And then I report the remaining unexpended amount as obligated on the DRF. So that's really summarize the presentation of the VC Fund Worksheet. Let us know if you have any questions, or feel free to go off mute and ask your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Appreciate your time. We're going to open the floor up. I know we only have a couple of minutes, but the team will stay on along with our SMEs. And like I stated, we will try our best to answer your questions. We have Carl, Eric, and Dan, and James, Lisa, and Sam on the call as well from the lending side. So please come off mute if you have any questions. And just while I talk, while you attempt to come off mute, we will share this slide in the presentation after this training, and we will put it in the portal as well. We will also share the latest VC Fund Worksheet that Sue just demoed along, so hopefully sometime this week, early next week. Sharina, please jump in.
Everyone, thank you so much for this. This is super helpful and appreciate all the detail and going through each step of the process. We have a couple of questions as we're in the process of finalizing our worksheet. And for one of the funds, it's the first time we've invested with another jurisdiction, and we just wanted to clarify a few questions that have come up along the way. The first one is that this fund has basically done subsequent closes with increased commitments from both jurisdictions. And so I think there's been a lot of back and forth, actually really helpfully with US Treasury as well, and sort of supporting them with this process. They have yet to call capital for sort of the next investments. And by the time we submit, we'll sort of include that last capital call. But their question is if they need to do sort of like point in time changing pro rata with each subsequent investment, or if they can sort of do like a catch up capital call that sort of captures everything between the first one that we made at the beginning of the year and what they're doing now. They've done everything else, like we've captured all the documentation and all of that. It's just now as it's truly a sort of an emerging manager, and they're trying to figure out how to navigate some of the back end accounting. And so it seemed like they were just nervous in calling capital in the wrong way. So we connected with them today, and their question is basically if they can sort of do a lump sum with the caught up pro rata that's sort of in effect today, as opposed to doing sort of multiple capital calls, or reflecting the capital call sort of based off of the pro rata as it changed.
I'm going to first ask my SMEs to maybe jump in here, Carl and Eric, and make sure I'm not giving Sharina the wrong information. So,
yeah, Carl
thank you,
here.
Carl.
Yeah, I'm still not 100% clear, Sharina, on the question. For DRF purposes, this worksheet should reflect the date of your submission. So when you submit the DRF, it'll have an effective date. And so all transactions should be reported as of that date. So on that date, all pro rata should have been adjusted for any interim capital calls, not capital calls, any capital raising. So if additional capital has come into the fund and your pro rata has changed, your position in all the portfolio companies should have been adjusted to reflect your new pro rata position in the fund.
Okay.
So
Great. So
it
can be basically a sort of a catch up, because they haven't called our capital just yet.
Yeah, so the one thing I'm afraid to answer there is obviously they can't invest in a company with other people's money and then call your capital and give you a position, right? So you can have your previous investments adjusted for your new pro rata, but they can't be making investments and then call capital from you later and then put you in the investment. That's not possible. So the DRF does not reflect capital calls. It reflects the activity of the fund in investing in the portfolio, right?
Yeah. Okay. That's helpful. And then this is again more of like a rules question, but for the same fund, we're not allowed to pay catch-up management fees because we're not allowed to participate in the previous investments. Is that correct?
Right. So if you come in after a close in which there were investments made out of that close, you can't participate in that portfolio retroactively or going forward. And so it's not appropriate to pay fees as if you were in the fund on that close, right? Because you're not. You're never going to get exposed to that portfolio. So your fees start sort of at the time your true commitment is effective.
Okay. And then, perfect. I just want to make sure that we were aligned on that understanding. And then the last question was the other jurisdiction that we're investing with sort of has tailored the certification documents to include sort of state-specific language. And so the certifications were all signed on time, but we're realizing that it says sort of that state at the top, but that what the company and the fund has certified is the same thing. So we just want to make sure that in terms of the evidence and the sampling, if they need to go and sort of have, of course, we would disclose that to you all, first of all, to make sure that's okay. But then secondly, if they need to go back and have those certifications re-signed for us, or if it's okay that it has the state specific, you know, it's
Yeah.
a state of at the top, but it's the same SSBCI cert.
Yeah, so I'll sort of punt this over to Mema and the compliance team for what would be required. But I would imagine that since they're signing a particularly conflict of interest certification, that conflict of interest is specific to each state, right? So,
Yep.
so I think you would need your own conflict of interest certification to reflect your insider group, because Georgia or whoever the other state is certainly is not doing that for you, right? So
No, but
that,
this is what the fund is certifying, right? So the fund has checked both of our conflict of interest lists, but they were using one certification because when we were initially talking about working with them, we said, hey, look, we all have the exact same certification. You can sign one document as long as the fund and company is checking across both conflict of interest lists.
then presumably they should have both your names on the certification, but I'll leave it over to Mema on this one.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
that would be the concern I would have, is that we couldn't tell whether they were certifying to you or not for your insider situation.
Got it.
Yep, we would need a certification to support each transaction from whatever the other jurisdiction and your jurisdiction. So you should have a certification completed for your SSBCI funds in those transactions.
Okay. And then as we look at, and we're just sort of going through all the documentation with them, so I want to make sure that we have this fully covered. As we look at sort of what they've done is sort of had it for both. So it's like says state of California and state of Georgia. Does that work or does it need to be two separate ones, I guess is my question.
Yeah, I'll leave that to Mema or team. I mean, use of proceeds will be the same irrespective of the state. So
Use of proceeds, and they've checked both conflict of interest. So they've sort of done the work, but I think they didn't realize that it said the other state's name sort of at the top, and what they're actually certifying is the same. So that's just the thing that we're trying to make sure we have lined up
In our
properly.
review, we will, if we see something like that in our review, we will flag it and ask you a question about it. It will not rise to a not compliant issue, but we do
Okay.
recommend that you clarify that and make sure that we can support the certification that's supported by your SSBCI funds and from any other jurisdiction's SSBCI fund. I think that's the key.
Okay, but you don't necessarily need both as long as it sort of shows that the document does also refer to our conflict of interest list, then that's fine.
Honestly, we will recommend that you have both. If you can do that going forward, we will recommend that.
Okay, so have the same certification signed twice. Is that what I'm hearing? Also for use of proceeds and the others, or is this just for most important for COI?
Yeah, I think generally, Carl, when we see these transactions, we want certification from each side, separate certification. So that would be my recommendation to reduce the amount of questions that come from us.
Okay.
yeah, and
All
then
right.
don't forget, Sheena, on the conflict of interest side, your internal memorializing of the process should reflect that, to comply with the FAQ that came out that provides a safe harbor.
For
that
the
you-
safe harbor.
you
Yeah.
did the appropriate checks and all that. So to the
Yep.
extent, Mema's team will ask you if one of these things arises and they see some, one certification, the way you could back it up is with whatever internal documents you collected at the time, right?
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. That's it for now. Thank you. Oh, sorry. One
Thank you.
last sort of just future thing. Would it be possible to hop on a call with Treasury, the fund, and the other jurisdiction as well, just so that way as we're filling out the worksheet, we're accounting for everything the right way?
Yep, we can talk internally if you don't mind submitting that to us and we can arrange with our SMEs.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Carl. Any other questions? I know we're over 6 minutes and thanks for your patience. Okay, I'm happy to conclude that training today. Again, like we stated, We will try our best to provide this by the end of week, the deck and the video, and we will also upload this in our reporting portal. We already also have some videos that you may reference. The worksheet that Sue shared, we will share that. And if you need any walkthrough on the VC Fund worksheet as you start completing your template, please set up time with us. We want to make sure that you have that information correct. That is all I have. Thank you again for making time to join our training. We hope you find this useful. And again, we're anticipating getting your second or third tranche submissions coming up. So please take advantage of the pre-data validation process. Okay, thank you everyone from Treasury and from the jurisdiction for making time for us. And we hope you have a great week. Thank you.